19, Mr. Thurman, extension of contract with McKenna Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're asking the board to approve an extension of the contract with McKenna Long and Aldridge Governance Center for installation of governance evaluation and accountability systems. This contract will cover phase 2 of the compliance of their initial work, which was in phase 1. Phase 2 of the MLA governance review is the implementation phase and shall involve the implementation of governance best practice systems, controls, culture, reporting systems utilizing developed metrics for each significant activity of the district, enterprise risk management, and other processes at both the administrative level and board level to address the governance-related advanced ed required actions and to allow the district's implementation and oversight governance functions to connect and enable meaningful oversight by the superintendent of the administration and by the Board of Education. Development and implementation of systems and principles will address the governance aspects of the advanced ed required actions and directives, and that's required actions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we will develop and implement systems with respect to number 1, building a mission-driven culture, number 2, enterprise risk management, compliance, internal audit, controls, reporting, and most importantly, metrics and scorecard for all significant district activities. As for the board's approval.
Is there any discussion? Mr. Mayfield.
Yes, I have several questions, I think, on this one, so if you'll indulge me. I guess the first question that I have has to do with the scope of work that was presented in the original contract, which deals with 3 months worth of work to summarize the findings and make such recommendations as may be appropriate. And so, because it doesn't provide specific details and or timelines to implement the recommendation, which is what the request is asking for, which is the intended purpose of, I guess, of the recommendation, I guess my first concern would be whether or not this is actually should be an extension versus a new contract for implementation.
I'll defer to legal authority on that. I'm sure we have legal authorities in the room. I hope we have some legal authorities in the room.
We do. However, I see your point, Mr. Mayfield, but the superintendent posed it as a phase 2, and the board would be within its parameters to approve it either way. And in as much as the superintendent has asked the board to approve the extension, that would be my recommendation.
So essentially, I mean, for this particular one, we would be approving expenditures for specifics that we don't have detailed in a document.
Well, I'll defer to the superintendent for his recommendation on the scope of the work to be performed.
I think we just laid out at least details as to what we intend to do in phase 2, if I understand the question. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Right. Well, I guess the documentation that was sent to support it outlined the work that would take place in phase 1 over the 3-month period, which was the findings and the set of recommendations. It doesn't detail the original document, the original contract, unless this attachment, this exhibit, which I've just been handed, is supposed to represent the details of the specifics that would be provided in phase 2.
Correct.
Okay. And then I guess the second question that I have then is what the deliverables are that are associated with these specifics.
I think they are in the document that you have in your hand. It's Exhibit 2 in your book. It's in my book.
It was in the packet, Mr. Thurman. You received it in the packet, Ms. Francois, if you will clarify that they received it in the packet, and then she did a second round and sent it electronically.
Yeah, Ms. Tyson, it was not in the packet I received at my house.
Ms. Francois, will you clarify, please, for the board?
Packets were sent on Friday that included the updated agenda item 19, the original letter of engagement, and the exhibit. And these documents were also placed on e-board at that time.
But I want to be clear that I opened the packet, I looked at every document inside it, and this was not in there. And in fact, I sent an email over the weekend to that
It was also
effect.
sent this morning.
Right, no, I understand that, but it's just one of the things, I think, to Mr. Mayfield, it's kind of hard for us to make a evaluation when we don't have
So
it.
it was not in anyone's packet?
No.
Did you have it, Mr. Irwin, Dr. Irwin? No.
Well, it should have been.
Okay. And so my third question has to do with the performance of Phase 1, as it might relate to additional terms and conditions that need to be included in Phase 2. And I note that Phase 1's timeline the plan exceeded its timeline by 100%. And I guess I wanted to ask whether or not there should be proposed terms and conditions that we should recommend to avoid or mitigate the prospects of those occurrences in Phase 2.
Well, actually, I think the work that we had outlined in Phase 1 was actually completed. The time lag occurred in getting a presentation before the board. I think that's more or less what happened as it relates to when we were able to have the meeting, the call meeting, and when they were able to present.
Right. Well, as I read Phase 1's contract, this was a 3-month agreement for
Correct.
$50,000 each, which would have been $150,000. But we're having to expend an additional $150,000 to cover 3 additional months, which is what I'm interpreting as the 100% increase in the cost of Phase 1.
Well, you can look at it that way. What originally occurred, if you all will remember, when I was first asked to come, well, you all weren't here. You may not remember. Come to think of it.
Right.
Now that I think about it, you all were not here.
Right.
But when I was originally invited to take the position, one of the things I laid out to the board that I needed some expertise and support in order to address many of the issues that the district was facing. One of the things I decided to do strategically, and when I look back on it, I think based on recent history, you may have noticed I did not bring a team of new employees with me. And that was done intentionally. My successor, as you all remember, and it was her prerogative, bought 25 or 30 people in the district, and also moved and or laid off about that same number at the senior management level.
Mm-hmm.
That I took as in my initial evaluation, I found that to be very disruptive at many levels and not counterproductive. So what I decided to do was basically to maintain the people who were in place and to utilize outside consultants and resources to assist me in what was a situation that was in deep crisis when I arrived in the district. And that began the process of healing that has brought us to the point where we are today.
Right. But so my question, though, is that because of the past performance in Phase 1, do we need additional terms and conditions in Phase 2's contract to prevent a doubling of the time and resources, financial resources required to execute Phase 2? Some assurances that that would not happen again.
Well, you have to look at what was being done in Phase 1. For instance, the rewriting of the retainer agreement with King and Spalding. You can't really put a time phase into how and when that got done. But as a result of the support and at least the consultation with me, we were able to save $30 million potentially for the district. I would have hoped to have gotten that done within a week or a month, but that was something that had bedeviled the district for the last 5 to 8 years. And so we were not really in a position where we could do it within 90 days, but in fact, it got done.
So you're saying that negotiation was a part of this particular agreement?
No, I'm saying that they assisted me in developing the strategy that needed to be developed in order to get that done, something that had evaded the district for years. I utilized on an ongoing basis their advice consultation in order to do it, yes.
So it was outside of the scope of the original agreement?
No. My job was to, number one, get the fiscal house in order. Having that potential hanging over the district has been, and in some extent continues to be, a major challenge, but rewriting the contract, as Moody's pointed out, was one of the saving graces we had in the recent evaluation that they did at the district, because they pointed out that the rewriting of that contract was a positive step in getting control of our potential legal liabilities.
Oh, no, I agree with that, and I guess I'm seeing that as not a part of the scope of the services that McKenna, Long, and Aldridge proposed in their February 17th letter, that it deals with the specific deals with an outline, methodology, and steps, essentially, to provide governance review and assist the system in other key stakeholder outreach in that process. And so I'm trying to understand the relationship between...
Oh, no, it's governance. And the fact that we find ourselves in that position that we're in as it relates to the hearing litigation is a perfect example of failed governance at the board level. I think it might be the most glaring example, quite frankly, when you look at the fact that this district has spent $20 million, and I can't think of anything that defines failed governance as when we invest $20 million in a lawsuit that began over a dispute of about $500,000. That's governance.
Okay,
or that's the lack of governance.
Right. I'll come back to that one then, Mr. Superintendent. I guess my fourth question has to do with the steps that the board should enter into in terms of commencing the phase 2 or the implementation, and whether or not it is appropriate for the board and or the governing, and as the governing body, to review the recommendations that are made to determine which of the recommendations we would in fact implement.
Absolutely.
Before having an agreement.
Absolutely. Okay. Yes.
And so I guess then just stopping there, if we have to decide what those recommendations are, do we need a forum that we would suggest that we would approve for implementation? Do we need a session in which we review those recommendations and make the determinations of what in fact should be implemented?
That will be up to the chair, and I'll work at the disposal of the chair and the board.
Okay, well, naturally, we would do whatever the board wishes to do in that regard.
Can I ask a question here?
Yes,
and
ma'am.
Sort of related to that, because my understanding is when you're looking at the governance, and what I'm understanding, Mr. Thurman, that you're saying is that when we're looking at the original contract, everybody know that when we came in, when Mr. Thurman came in, when we all came in, that there was a bunch of stuff that was going on. So even though there was a prediction and there was an amount given to be able to handle that, that Harry case came back up front where he had an opportunity to be able to deal with it. And so that extended the amount of time. So it wasn't a double dipping per se that they would have to double the amount of time. Then the other thing is, if we're asking him to carry out the duties, and what he agreed to when he first took on this contract was that he would be able to have the consultants. And so for us to tell him what we're going to approve for him to do to get the job done, then are we going back the same way that the other board did when they were telling the other superintendents or the superintendents who were not effective and how to be able to do what they're doing? So if the superintendent is saying, this is what I need to be able to carry these duties out to get us back to govern, we're governing the superintendent and the organization, but at the same time, here are the duties, here's what I need. Would it behoove us to be the ones to tell him what he needs to do in order to get that done? Are we not here to be able to support him, give him the authority to be able able to do the things that he's already said he needed. Because of the fact, when we look at the last 9 months, we've seen that everything that this superintendent has brought to bear has been more effective, has been expeditious, has saved this district money, has actually stated what a district is supposed to do, and it has been done. But when we start looking at deciding what we're going to tell him what to do that, then again, I go back to the question I asked before, do we need a superintendent?
No, I think you're, or at least I'm not understanding the agreement that McKenna, Long, and Aldridge presented to us that we're being asked to extend as it relates to executive action as compared to governance. And so as I interpret this governance issue, that this governance issue is in fact a board issue, and that in order to execute or to implement the governance components that they are recommending, that it is the board that needs to decide what elements, or at least contribute to the decision of what elements need to be included in the implementation of the governance structure or the governance change.
I understand. Well, that's a generally perceived notion that governance is a board issue, but it's not. It actually, and I think you all are coming over to Athens in a couple of weeks to participate in a governance conference. Governance goes to every employee in the district, and how we interact with our external stakeholders who are not employees. One of the big mistakes is not how you all interact at board meeting.
Right.
Governance is how a school bus driver interacts with a parent who might be upset about something that occurred on the bus. It's how I interact with a custodian or a janitor. Governance is every aspect of this school district.
Right.
How we relate to one another. Do we have a common idea, goals and objectives about what we are here for and what are the priorities of the district? So it's not just the board, it's everybody, and how we relate to one another in a positive way that will hopefully move the district forward.
Okay.
And that's not the general definition. I'm just telling you, publicly, governance, and when you say we got a governance issue, people look at the board. That's really not the problem in DeKalb. The board really represents the organization. And if you have issues internally, they manifest themselves here at this level. And so we have to begin now to build a new culture that permeates every aspect of the DeKalb County School District. I think we're on our way to doing it, but we have a long way to go.
Well, I don't disagree with you. I just disagree, I think, right now with the proposal to implement a set of governance activities or governance management activities that does not include board input one.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's not the proposal. Everything I do, the only person who could really do it is me, and I work at the command and control of the board. So I can't do anything without the support of the board. And obviously a contractor or a vendor could not implement a policy that hadn't been approved by this board.
I understand that, but I'm understanding the components of deliverables that are associated with this particular contract, which is being asked to be extended, is not about the administration of bus drivers. It is about the governance of the system, and that the governance of the system, at least primarily, is the responsibility of the board, and therefore the types of items that need to be included in that agreement need to reflect the governance issues that the board is concerned with.
The board passes, develops, and implements policy.
Correct.
It's not governance. See, we think of governance as who's a command control. The board's job is to develop policy, hire a superintendent, make sure he or she is accountable to the board. The governance that I'm referring to actually does impact buses, because it was a failed governance that resulted in us having buses that were continuously and chronically late. That was a governance issue. When our students don't achieve at the levels at which they should, That is a governance issue, because that means the people who sat in my seat and people who sat in your seat have not in the past developed a comprehensive strategy that takes the resources that are available through Raise to the Top and others, and then invest them in a way that will support academic performance and achievement in the class. I submit to you, that is a governance issue. And if our children are failing, that means that the people in positions of authority have failed to do their job.
Mr. Orson?
To follow up on my friend, Mr. Mayfield, and I have some concerns that I think are being expressed by Mr. Mayfield at a couple different levels. And I was a supporter of the original engagement of MLA because I saw the need for a kind of a broad scope review to the level you described of what was taking place in the system. I am concerned that, one, there was sort of mission creep without the authorization of the board, because to Mr. Mayfield's point, we authorized an engagement of $150,000 over a period of time for a very specific set of actions, and that has somehow, even before we get to the extension, doubled in its amount. And some things, and not to diminish, for example, the work that was done on with King and Spalding on Erie, some of it was done even before MLA, because we had met with council and started to lay that groundwork.
One meeting.
But I think we started to lay the groundwork of where the board and the direction might be in. Again, not to diminish the work of MLA, but I think it's important also to recognize that if that was added into the scope and also ultimately into the cost of their engagement, it was never anything that was brought before the board. And I understand that that can happen for a while, but that's essentially over a 3-month period that the cost doubled. Secondly, to Mr. Mayfield's point, I feel I don't have any comfort with the furthering the engagement at a level of what would be $600,000 additional dollars, a total of $750 if you add the $150 from the summer, without really understanding the scope and details of whether it's a scope and details of what we want in that further engagement. I think, and we are in one of these tricky areas, with all due respect to Dr. Morley, because while they are engaged in kind of governance advice as a law firm, and as council can probably tell you, when it comes to the control of law firms and school boards and school systems, it's a very murky area under the law in Georgia as to whether that belongs to the school board or to the administration. In fact, if you look at how our budgets work, particularly for legal services, they are put against school boards in the state of Georgia. We pay for them, and so that adds, and that's not to make the policy argument but it is the one area under Georgia law. And to Mr. Mayfield's point, I think that is not as clear-cut in terms of what the relationship is of the board and the administration to the provision and acquisition of those services. So, but the larger problem for me is I don't have the comfort to authorize what would be a total expenditure of $750,000 without really knowing what it is we're getting that is more detailed than what's in this document that we just got, and whether it's that we want that breadth of services or whether we want something more narrowly confined that might also be less expensive.
First of all, not legal services. You use the term legal services. We didn't hire them for legal services.
I understand that, but there's a gray area when they start talking about our engagement with another law firm, which relates to a lawsuit. I think it becomes a little gray.
No, I said they advised me. That was the statement.
I understand that, but were they advising you concerning our relationship with one of our law firms?
No, they were advising me as to how I could solve a problem that no one had seemed to be able to solve, that had bedeviled the district for years, and that ultimately saved the district potentially $30 million. Let me go forward and some of the other things that might help you understand it. In April of this year, I walked into a meeting where the former CFO was getting ready or had directed my senior staff to cut an additional $25 million from the budget and lay off 300 more people. And some of the people in this room was in the meeting that had lasted throughout the day. What I had done prior to that, because I had some concerns, was they had the opportunity to interview, and I'll go ahead and say it, Dr. Bell. And they also, through their research, it helped me to understand that there may be some sources of revenue that our former people who had been in the position had overlooked. Based on that, I was able to engage with a neighbor to look at our budget. As a result, we didn't lay off the 300 people. We didn't cut the $25 million budget. And we were able to find $27 million that had been overlooked. That gets me to $57 million impact. As a result of that, we have $9.5 million in reserve. That's $66 million. When we talk about fiscal impact, we really need to look at it in a more global sense.
Okay.
And I'm back to where I was when I came in February. The one thing, and you were in the room, Mr. Orson, and Dr. Johnson was there, and Mr. McMahon. You know, if I'm going on Mission Impossible, I get to pick who go with me. I'm not going on Mission Impossible, then you choose who my people will be. I said to the board then that if I'm going to take this job that nobody else seemed to want, that everybody thought was basically impossible, a job that no one ever believed we could ever avoid losing accreditation or remaining in deficit for the next 3 to 4 years, we had an agreement. And the board at that time said, look, if you will take this risk of your reputation and your career, we are going to support you. And so we're back at that point again, I believe. And it's whether or not this board will maintain and keep its commitment.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. McMahon,
Okay.
and then Mr.
Thank you, Chairman. Legal, does the superintendent have the ability to, from a board policy standpoint, to and explain it, to spend $50,000 a month on his own without board approval?
Yes.
The current board policy authorizes the superintendent with up to $100,000.
Right.
Any specific, any purchase.
So I mean, for a single, I mean, I'm trying to find a solution to this without, because I get the point of we authorized $150 or $150,000 for this project. It took longer. I'm just saying, could that additional 50 per month fall under that policy where he has the administrative ability?
Well, I think if I could respond.
And I'll let you respond. And then the second solution is I think the superintendent realizes this Board of Education supports him and his initiatives. And I think this comes back to a communication standpoint, to where I would feel similar with what's been said today, more comfortable approving this with further communication, just more details in it. And if it's having another, I know we don't like having a ton of meetings, but just from a communication standpoint, have a work session or meet individual, however we want to find that solution. I'm open to it, and because I do support our superintendent and MLA and their governance team, which is, I think, probably the best in the nation. So from a legal perspective, policy, does the superintendent have the ability to make that? Does this fall under the purview of $50,000 under our $100,000 a month? That's the question.
It wouldn't be $100,000 a month, but, I mean, this really is a decision for the board. It's not for the lawyers to decide.
I'm asking from a policy standpoint, legally, compliantly.
This is not a policy.
Well,
The law says 50,000, no more than 100,000. So after 2 months, it would have to be back here anyway.
Or
I think that
unless
we
it
have,
was an incremental decision.
yeah, I think we have to start looking at, I think we keep getting legalities all confused with what we're here to do. We are the purveyors of policy. And the thing about it is, when this man took on this battle, whatever we want to call it, there was an agreement made. One of the things I have a concern about, and I have voiced it over and over, is that when we came in here, we've come in and we want to keep tearing things apart. Nothing can be put together unless you go about it in a systematic way. It has to be methodically done. And if we're going to continuously tell the superintendent who he can have, this is a board of education, not a corporate board, and I think there's a great difference. And when you're talking about legalities, everything comes down to what's legal, what the lawyers say, what the other districts say about law. If you want someone to lead, you have to give them permission. And one of the things that I have said to the board is we need to look at, I know a couple of you don't like Carver's book on board governance. It will state there specifically in there how you really do it, and has been adopted by a lot of nonprofit organizations on how you govern as a board. But to be able to tell the superintendent and micromanage that this is the person you can and cannot have, when it has been efficient and effective, you have to look at that. Has it been something that has not been efficient and effective? Have we not exceeded expectations? And to sit and nitpick all the time about every little thing, at some point we've got to stop it. And we've got to look at what's effective, what's efficient, what's the best interest of our children. Because to come up now and say, yeah, this went along, and I hear what you're saying, Thad, I understand what you're saying, but it's not duplicating when it was not a part of the original, but it had to be done. So if it took us 6 more months to be able to get something done, to get us out of a mess that we've been in the sewer for 10 years, and everybody has sat back here and watched this system just suck the blood out of our children, out of our families, and then we're going to complain now? And the millions that have gone out the door, there's a real problem. We need to be able to ask the superintendent, what do you need? And if it's feasible, if it's appropriate, if it's not against the law, if it's not draining everybody, then what do we need to do in order to come alongside him and support him in his efforts to get this place to where it needs to be? And if we stop on every little turnstile and try to find that little thing under every rock, we're going to be belaboring the point, and then that trust that the community is beginning to put in us, they're going to begin to question too. Why every time something comes up that we're looking at every little thing and saying, what's in the best interest? And as if I were superintendent coming in, I'm an educator, and you have to understand from an educational perspective, there's a total difference in an educational system than other organizations. It takes a difference, and you do need to have your own team. But when this man has come in and said, we're not going to lay off all these people, get rid of all these people, but I need to be able to have the support I need. He could not do it without the support of the group that has been there with him. And I think that we have to look at it in a different perspective. So all I'm asking us to do is to just look at things from a panoramic perspective, look at it, and stop looking at it from always from a legalistic or the money. Yeah, money is very important, but what do we need now? Do we have it? Can we make it go forward for this superintendent to be able to do the best job he can to get us where we need to get to?
Thank you, Dr. Marley. What I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, first of all, I hear the superintendent pleading to the board that what I need to be successful and to take the district where you asked me to take the system to, this is what I need. I did not bring in additional staff. I did not bring in permanent staff members that would be on the payroll forever. But this is what I need. I need direction, expertise, and support. On the other end, I hear board members saying that, okay, we support you, but we want specifications in terms of what they will be doing, or to be more specific as to what they will be doing to accomplish exactly what the superintendent says he wants. If I'm understanding everybody from that standpoint, let me know, because if that is the case,
I think there's a slight difference. I think there's a slight, at least from my perspective, the reason that I raised the question. I think what the superintendent articulated in terms of the support that he needs and the support that he got, I think he deserves it. I think if it were a contract for $1.2 million to make that happen, I think he deserves it. I don't think this is the instrument to do it. This instrument is describing a governance level, a support of us meeting a SACS requirements that is specific to board governance, and we are using this instrument to provide the support that he needs. I think there needs to be a different agreement for what he just described in terms of the support that he needs and whatever resources that he needs to make that happen. I think he's well deserved. I don't think this is the instrument, and I think it's, certainly for me, it does not align with my understanding, and I would imagine on some level some of the constituents' understanding that I communicate with the perception what he described as support that he needs does not align with what kind of support does the governance structure of this institution need in order to align itself with the needs of the children and the taxpayers of the county. So I don't disagree with anything that the superintendent has offered. I just don't think this is the instrument to extend to do that.
Mr. Thurman?
In our discussions with SACS, one of the things that must occur before December, and one of the things that I've heard several board members speak to over and over and over again, is about metrics and standards and evaluations. Mr. Mayfield speaks to that all the time. We don't have anybody on staff right now who can develop that system. And I don't know whether the board wants to devote its time over the next 2 months. The key thing here, if we're going to get our probation, is developing a reporting system utilizing developed metrics for each significant activity of the district. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I've heard Mr. Orson and Mr. Mayfield and others go back to that point. Each time one of my staff members presents something, the thing that comes up is where's the measurement, where's the metrics, how do you do it, right? That does not exist now. What we're going to have to do is to develop it. I don't know anybody in the district who can develop it. We've asked for it. And what I understand, unless we have it, it's going to be much more difficult for us in 8 weeks.
I would agree with that, Mr. Superintendent, if I could interject. I believe there are a number of institutions that are in operations and process design that are probably, in my opinion, more capable of being able to provide that administrative support that the operations needs. I think that's a different conversation than government.
I understand, but as the superintendent, I get to, don't pick my team.
I'm not.
Let me pick who I want to play wide receiver. Right. That's all I'm saying. If you want me to score a touchdown, I'll score it. But you got to let me pick. You know how we used to do out on the schoolyard? Absolutely. If I want Beasley, let me have Beasley. Right? That's all I'm saying. Because, see, what I kind of get the impression, you know what? And I'll just say that. It's like, yeah, but we're going to tie your hand behind your back and see if you can pull it off.
I'm just saying this is not the instrument.
No.
So what is?
What is?
I think, yeah, I want to.
But we're going to develop this is not a contract.
No, I'm saying the request. The request asks for an extension of this contract.
So what do you, give us specifically what you're asking for?
Oh, okay.
Because we may be closer together than it appears.
Okay.
Describes what the superintendent is asking for. That is, in my understanding, very different from governance.
Ted, turn your microphone on.
That I understand is very different than governance, including what SACS is asking for.
So you're saying
I think it's a different type of support that he's asking for.
You were
that he's verbalizing.
Plus, you will rewrite the specifications as it relates to what you're asking for.
I'm saying that this contract shouldn't be extended to do what the superintendent is asking to be done because it doesn't articulate that. I'm asking that the superintendent provide us with an agreement that articulates what he's articulated today for consulting support that he needs to do what he says he's going to do.
But it's not an extension.
We're closer. Right. It's really what's being discussed, and I'm working on, actually, I'm researching, getting ready to deliver a speech in 2 weeks on board governance. What is it?
Right.
And this is the discussion. I'm with you now.
Okay.
So it's not about this. But see, in my mind, and I think it's a philosophical piece,
Okay.
and where we've gone wrong in public education is our lack of understanding of governance as a whole. Not just in DeKalb, but we've gone, it's impacted every school board in the state, if not in the nation, because we have a very narrow view of what governance is. And we associate it only with school boards. And it's not. If you really read the literature of those who deal in governance at the corporate, in a private and public arena, it's not the board. See, it's the entire organization. It's how I relate to my senior staff. It's governance.
I guess I get that as a concept, but I'm questioning whether or not the definition you're describing in terms of the impact of governance is, A, what Sachs is talking about when they speak to board governance, the issues that, the items that, for our actions as it relates to the document. But I think you're right. I think that's where the difference is in our interpretation of what governance is and whether or not we should be having, that we should have essentially what amounts to superintendent support presented as governance.
But
Dr. Carr.
I'm sorry.
I would just ask, these conversations are critical, and I don't want to squash that. But I think that our common ground is if we could come back with a contract that leads with your 1, 2, 3s and incorporates what we have to be responsible for as a board back to Sachs, so that it's governance holistically from what I'm hearing you say, and then broken down into the pieces that we need, because we're not where you are. Let's just face it. We aren't speaking that same language, so we need you to help us get there.
And my only challenge, and I agree with you, Dr. Carter, the point is, though, first week in December, it got to happen. No matter what we say.
We agree.
No matter what we think, that means that folk who got jobs got to stop doing their jobs and start coming to work every day at the district in order for us to achieve it. And I'm not going to ask you all to do it, because I don't think it's fair to ask you to do it, because that's not your role, because you're policy-making body. See, you're not supposed to. But if we are going to meet this deadline, I know Ms. Tyson looking at me, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 got to happen. There is no alternative scenario here. You cannot miss.
We agree.
Because if we miss, 100,000 children going to pay the price for it. And I don't know that anyone wants to take that risk. I don't. Not.
So what is the, what is your,
Can I ask one final question?
I'm sorry, go ahead. And then Dr. Campbell, Mr. Campbell.
Okay. So my understanding, Thad, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that I seem to hear you saying that you're looking for a clear agreement that has specific steps of what will be done, what the deliverables will be, a timeline. You're looking for an overall contract. Is that what I seem to hear you saying?
A proposal, if it's in the form of a recommendation. But I think we're also saying, I certainly think I'm saying, and I think even the superintendent is saying, is that there clearly is a difference in definitions of what our understanding and expectations are as it relates to governance.
And I think that's the word that we might need to look at in that document, because I'm wondering if that word was not in that document, would we have a totally different purview of exactly what's going on here today?
Well, I mean, even the supporting document, if I could, I mean, the supporting information speaks to the issue of governance from a governing body perspective. Yeah.
Well, maybe can suggest that when we do come back, when the superintendent does bring back that proposal, that he defined the definition of governance so that we can all understand, as Dr. Carter was saying.
So point of order, though, are we just looking at tabling them this for this evening? Just so we know, because we got 5 minutes till we have to be in our community meeting.
Dr. Mr. Campbell?
What's the time?
You had a...
What timeline will we operate on? Thad's point is, we got a separate contract. We understand that the superintendent needs to have this as a resource. What kind of timeline do you need for us to work with you so that we can meet the SACS requirements?
Well, what would have happened? The next step is to develop a contract, assuming I get support from the board to do it, and then to sign it, with y'all's approval.
Okay.
That's the next step. If we
Another
get
week.
approval, I think we can develop a contract that meets Mr. Mayfield's philosophical concerns, and we'll continue this philosophical discussion, right? Yeah, I understand. But it's an important discussion. I'm just telling you, and I appreciate the opportunity to expound on it, because I think, goes to the center or the heart of the challenges that public education faces in America today. What is governance? It really is.
So Superintendent Thurman, are we talking waiting until the next meeting in November? Are we talking a couple of weeks? What kind of turnaround do you want?
I think we can develop a contract that meets Mr. Mayfield's expectations.
In a week?
Okay.
If we could vote today, I could develop the contract and move on.
Know what the details of the contract. I mean, I think this is sort of where we're cart and horse here. Till we know the details of the contract, I can't feel comfortable voting in blank. And I think I would speak for Mr. Mayfield also.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't assume that you would have to speak for me. But I do agree with that position. I think we need to see what it is that we're voting on. I think we need to see what we're voting on before we vote on it.
Are we not voting on the services?
Yes.
We're voting on the services. We already know what the services are provided, and then the contract has to be put together before that we can actually ratify the contract.
That's not what the recommendation is that's on the table right now. The recommendation that's on the table is to extend this agreement.
Well, you would need a contract to do it.
No, I just need a proposal that outlines something different than what this contract, which is what was presented to us as the tool by which we would acknowledge this recommendation.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I'd recommend that we replace the proposal for an extension of the current contract and request that the superintendent draft a contract consistent with what he's presented today for us to approve within a week.
Within a week?
Yes.
Okay.
Is that timeline sufficient, or?
I think the problem is simply this. You can't specifically state, because then I'm going to hear mission creep. Because then if an issue presents itself, then that means I can't seek any counsel because it's not specifically detailed in a contract. Because that's what Mr. Orson just said. And that's what
Well,
Mr.
I think when
Mayfield-
something goes from $150 to $300,000, there's a sense that something has grown in great proportion. The fact
we
that you
went
give us
from $30 to $50 million in savings.
that is not to diminish the outcomes at all, but I think
But
we
it's
still
exactly what it is.
no, we still have a responsibility by policy and by law to approve these things, and I think we have to feel sufficiently informed about the scope of what we're improving, and that's our job. That's our job under any practice of governance, even for the carvers. It's the practice, and so in this case, I think I second Mr. Mayfield's sense. We support your bringing a proposal that defines the assistance and actions you need. We just need some definition around that to feel comfortable. And we understand that there are alterations that occur within the scope of the contract that are still within that scope.
Mr. Ramsey, would you comment on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Consistent with most actions that are brought before the board is asked to give the superintendent authority to negotiate and bind an agreement. And that is what the superintendent is asking the board to do here this evening. He has laid out the scope. The initial engagement letter does contemplate this second phase. And so the superintendent is simply asking the Board of Education to give him the authority to bind and negotiate the second phase of this agreement. And that's consistent with what the board does month in and month out.
Except this time it comes real close to micromanaging because you want to show me the agreement first. I mean, it's kind of insulting, actually.
Sure, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Dr. Irwin.
I don't think that's what the board is saying. I'm thinking the board wants to give you as much support as possible, but the board just wants a little detail.
But this is not the process that the board uses.
What, educate us on the process.
Mr. Ramsey just spoke to it.
But you're kind of asking us to give out a blank check.
No, what I'm asking is for the board to approve, just like we do in any other contract, a negotiation. We didn't vote on a single contract tonight. What you all voted was on items that authorize us to go forward and engage or invest money in the purchasing different academic resources and teaching supplement. That's every item we voted on tonight. I didn't see a single contract before anyone.
But I saw very great detail in the presentations, though.
Basically the same presentation. They're all on the same template.
Okay. We all agree that we want to support the superintendent. What I'm hearing, Dr. Carter suggested that whatever direction that you want to pursue in this regard, Mr. Superintendent, just put it in writing, and within a week, bring it back, and we will have a call meeting within 1 week, and we will vote on it. If everyone thinks that is a good idea, just let me know by the show of hands. Okay, that's what we'll do.
I don't think it's a good idea.
I don't.
You know.
So moved.
Number 19, extension of the contract with McKenna Long and Aldridge for installation of governance and evaluation. Dr. Marley, what was it? Mr. Campbell. Put your mic on. Oh.
Item number 19. I'd like to move that the Board of Education authorize the superintendent to negotiate an agreement with McKenna Long and Aldridge Governance Center for the implementation phase of the governance, best practices, systems, controls, culture, and reporting systems to address advanced ed required actions in an amount not to exceed $50,000 per month through June 30th, 2014.
Moved by Mr. Campbell, second by Dr. Marley. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, call for the vote. All in favor, no by show of hands. What now? Oh, it's working now? Okay, well, call for the vote. Dr. Yeah.
Such a negotiation.
Yeah.
We asked for discussion.
Dr. Carter, are you voting yes or no? Yes. So there'll be 6. Mr. 6-1, Mr. Mayfield. Okay, that's why I called for the question. I mean, I called for the discussion, but I didn't get any. Okay. Margaret, how do you count the votes? 6-1-1. Okay. No, that's okay. Okay. All right. All right. Thank you. It passes 6-1-1. Oh, we have two abstentions, don't we? Right. Okay. 6-2. It passes 6-2. Right, two abstentions. Okay. Very good.